Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. So today we're going to talk about the purpose of sky lanterns, also known as paper Chinese lanterns, for the purpose of reconnaissance and signaling in a crap hits the fan situation. So let's get to it. Alright guys, so every time I see something, I always try to conceptualize that thing in the context of SHTF. So I can't remember where exactly the thought of using sky lanterns in a SHTF scenario originated, but a few weeks ago I must have seen one somewhere and said, hey, that might have some utility in the case of a grid down where, maybe you don't want to use a flare because obviously flares are expensive, and maybe you don't want to use something like a bear banger that shoots up in the air and sends off a very loud blast or a gunshot. Maybe you don't want to use something auditory. Maybe you want to use something visual. And the good thing about something visual is sometimes it's easier to pinpoint the location of that thing than something that's auditory, like a gunshot, where it can be really hard to echolocate the source of it. Now, of course, these sky lanterns are going to be at the whim of the wind, so they're going to drift very far from their place of origin. They're probably only going to burn for a couple minutes or so. The great thing about these is all you need to operate them is fire. They're going to make a great reconnaissance or signaling tool, potentially even in an emergency situation, although there would be very few situations where you would carry something like this in a backpack because they are fairly fragile and all it takes is a minor tear for it not to work properly. So realistically, this is not going to be practical for somebody to keep on them for search and rescue purposes. Now, if you're looking for something like that, the Urban Prepper did a review of an item which was a signal balloon. It was called the Rescue Me signal balloon. I don't think it was able to reach its crowdfunding goal, so I'm not sure if it ever took off, no pun intended. But the general concept was that it functioned like a flare. You shot this thing up in the air, it turned into a balloon, and I believe it had some LED style SOS beacon on it. So in addition to the high-vis balloon, it also had a nighttime function. But like I said, I don't think that was successful. You could probably tie some thread onto this, but these things can only handle a certain amount of weight, so you can't put too much strain on it. And if you are pulling it against the wind, there's a good chance that it's going to light the entire paper on fire. Now, the paper is a bit more fire retardant than I thought it would be. It takes a little bit more to light than you would think. It's a very dry paper, but there must be some kind of fire retardant in the paper to prevent it from catching fire right away, because you would think that it would immediately catch fire, but it doesn't. You actually have to hold the flame to it a bit for it to catch fire, which is good. Now, you can get much bigger sky lanterns than this, which can be seen from much further away. The average human threshold for vision is to see a candlelight flicker at 30 miles away. So indeed, you can see these things from very, very far away because the flame that they emit is much bigger. You get this fire cake, which once fully ignited makes a very large flame, which can be seen from very far away. And I imagine if you scale this concept up, the fire cakes you use are going to get much bigger than that, and thus you'll be able to see it from even further away. So if you perhaps lived on a homestead, say, and there was an emergency and you had some neighbors down the road, you could obviously always signal using auditory means, but you could also signal like this. And obviously in a combat situation, they might be useful too. That's after all why they were invented. One of the hazards and one of the reasons why I don't release this fire lantern here is just a potential fire hazard. So if you live in a forested region and it is very dry, I would not suggest releasing a lot of these things unless you know that it's going to land in water, or you know that the prevailing wind is going to take it over a body of water or something like that, because there is a potential for it to cause a forest fire or a grass fire. Chances are it's gonna burn out before it hits the ground if it ignites up in the air. Better to be safe than sorry. I'd say only use it under circumstances where you can be confident that you're not going to cause a much bigger disaster from happening. Now, most historians would agree that the sky lantern was used circa 3rd century BC by Chinese generals for signaling their troops. And this is part of the reason why I chose to introduce this concept to the preparedness community, because when there is no technology, when the means of communication perhaps are down, even if you have a ham radio, if you don't have the means to power that ham radio, or if that radio has been compromised by electromagnetic pulse, the fact is we're going to be forced to revert to more primitive modes of communication post-collapse. I'm sure there was a multitude of creative ways that militaries use these lanterns, even the potential for subterfuge or confusing an enemy. But it doesn't hurt to have some of these things in your arsenal, and they are so incredibly cheap that I wouldn't waste my time trying to make some, because it's going to take you an hour to make one, and I think they're probably about $1 each, so don't even bother trying to make them. And once you get one and you see the basic concept, if you ever had to make one, you probably could. Who knows, maybe someday I'll take this concept one step further and actually get my own hot air balloon that I could use for post-collapse recon. Maybe I should start a GoFundMe campaign for that. Anyways, if you want to get some of these, I'll post a link in the description. If anything, they'd make for some good family fun. Just make sure you use it over a body of water or shortly after a good stretch of rain to ensure that you don't cause any forest fires and you don't set your neighbor's house on fire. Thanks for watching. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe. Canadian Prepper out.